The dust settled on Clara Peterson's wedding dress 6 months after they buried Thomas in the cold October ground of 1883, and she swore on his grave that no man would ever hold that kind of power over her heart again. She had been 22 when she watched consumption steal the breath from her husband's lungs. 22 when she became a widow in a town that whispered behind raised hands about how young women who lost their men either remarried quickly or disappeared into the shadows of propriety. Clara chose neither. Instead, she took over Thomas's general store in Carlin, Nevada, learning the ledgers and inventory with the same fierce determination that had carried her through those final terrible weeks at his bedside. The store sat on Main Street between the saloon and the telegraph office, a sturdy wooden building with large windows that caught the morning sun. Clara arrived every day at dawn, sweeping the boardwalk and arranging the goods with meticulous care. She had learned that keeping busy meant keeping the grief at bay, that counting tins of beans and bolts of fabric gave her something to focus on besides the empty house that still smelled faintly of laudanum and sickness. It was a Tuesday morning in April of 1884 when Jake Thornton first walked through her door, his boots leaving prints of red Nevada dust across her clean floor. Clara looked up from her account book and felt an immediate irritation at the mess, though she kept her expression neutral. The man was tall, built lean and strong like most cowboys who spent their days in the saddle. His dark hair needed cutting, and several days of stubble shadowed his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her attention despite herself, a startling gray blue that seemed to take in everything about her in a single glance. "Morning, madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal that too long hair. "I'm looking for rope, good quality, and maybe some coffee if you have it." "I have both." Clara set down her pen and moved behind the counter, grateful for the barrier it provided. "How much rope do you need?" "About 50 feet should do it. We are mending fences out at the Double I Ranch." He followed her to where the coils hung on the wall, and she was aware of his presence in a way that made her uncomfortable. It had been so long since she had noticed a man as anything other than a customer or a nuisance. Clara pulled down a coil, testing the strength with practiced hands. "This is good hemp, will hold in any weather. Anything else?" "That coffee you mentioned." His voice carried a hint of amusement, as though he could sense her desire to finish the transaction and have him gone. "And maybe you could tell me your name, seeing as how I will probably be coming in here regular-like. Just got hired on at the ranch for the spring and summer, Clara Peterson. I own the store." She moved to the coffee beans, measuring out 2 pounds into a paper sack. "That will be $2.15 total." He counted out the coins, placing them on the counter with deliberate care. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living. "Jake Thornton, pleased to make your acquaintance, Mrs. Peterson." She noticed he had seen her wedding ring, the simple gold band she still wore like armor. "Miss Peterson, actually. I am a widow." "I am sorry for your loss." The words sounded genuine, not like the empty platitudes she had endured for months. Jake gathered his purchases but did not immediately leave. "This is a good store, well organized. You run it yourself." "I do." Clara met his eyes directly, challenging him to make something of it. Many men in town thought a woman had no business running an establishment alone, that she should sell it and find another husband to take care of her. "That is impressive." He settled his hat back on his head. "I will see you again, Miss Peterson. Good day." After he left, Clara found herself staring at the dusty boot prints, feeling something she had not felt in a long time, curiosity about another person. She shook her head firmly and retrieved the broom. It meant nothing. He was just another customer, another cowboy who would drift on when the season ended. She had no room in her carefully constructed life for complications, but Jake Thornton proved to be persistent in the quietest way possible. He came into the store every week, sometimes twice, always polite, always making small talk that Clara initially resisted. He never pushed, never asked personal questions, just commented on the weather or mentioned something interesting that had happened at the ranch. Slowly, almost against her will, Clara found herself anticipating his visits. Heard there was a mountain lion spotted up near the north pasture, Jake said one morning in early May, selecting tobacco from the jar on the counter. Boss wants us to keep an eye on the cattle, make sure nothing gets picked off. Dangerous work. Clara measured out the tobacco, trying to keep her tone neutral. She had been listening to his stories for over a month now, learning about his life in pieces. He was 27, had been working ranches since he was 15, and had a quiet competence that the foreman at the Double I valued highly. Part of the job. Jake handed her the money, and their fingers brushed briefly. Clara pulled back as though burned and saw something flicker in his eyes. "Miss Peterson, I was wondering if you might like to have dinner with me sometime. Nothing fancy, just the restaurant down the street." "No." The word came out harder than she intended. "I am sorry, Mr. Thornton, but no. Can I ask why not?" His voice was gentle, not demanding. Clara felt her chest tighten. "Because I was married. Because I watched my husband die slowly over 6 months, and it nearly destroyed me. Because I cannot do that again, cannot let myself care about someone who could be taken away. This life is hard and short, and I cannot survive that kind of loss twice." Jake was quiet for a long moment, his gray-blue eyes searching her face. "I understand, but for what it is worth, I think you are one of the strongest people I have ever met. Running this store alone, making a life for yourself despite what you have been through, that takes real courage. It is not courage." Clara turned away, straightening items on the shelf that did not need straightening. "It is just survival. Maybe they are the same thing sometimes." Jake picked up his tobacco. "I will not ask again, Miss Peterson, but I want you to know something. I am a patient man, and I have come to care about you these past weeks. If you ever change your mind, if you ever want to take a chance on something good, I will be waiting. No pressure, no expectations. Just a chance to see what might be possible between two people." After he left, Clara stood behind the counter with her hands shaking. She had been so certain of her decision to close her heart, to live her life in the safe gray space where nothing could hurt her. But Jake's words had cracked something open inside her, a tiny fissure in the wall she had built so carefully. The spring turned to summer, and Jake continued to come into the store. True to his word, he never mentioned dinner again, never pushed for anything beyond their brief, friendly interactions. But Clara began to notice things about him. The way he always held the door for older customers. How he never failed to compliment her on some change she had made to the store's layout. The stories he told about helping a first-time mother cow deliver her calf, sitting up all night in the barn to make sure both made it through safely. One scorching July afternoon, Clara was struggling to move a shipment of flour sacks into the storeroom when Jake appeared, seemingly from nowhere. "Let me help with that," he said, already lifting 2 sacks as though they weighed nothing. "I can manage," Clara protested, but he was already carrying them to the back. "I know you can. I have seen you do everything around here, but that does not mean you should break your back when help is available." He made several trips, stacking the heavy sacks neatly while Clara watched, feeling an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. When he finished, his shirt was damp with sweat and dust streaked his face. Clara found herself moving without thinking, dampening a cloth at the small sink in the storeroom. "Here," she said softly, handing it to him. Jake took the cloth, but his eyes never left her face. "Thank you." No, thank you for helping. You are always helping, even when I do not ask. Clara twisted her hands together, a nervous gesture she had not made in months. Jake, I appreciate your kindness. I appreciate your patience. But I need you to understand something. The fear I feel, it is not something that just goes away. Thomas and I were married for 3 years. We were happy, planning a family, building a life. And then he got sick, and every day I watched him get weaker, watched him struggle for every breath. The doctors could not help. I could not help. I just had to stand there and watch him slip away. Jake set down the cloth, moving a step closer but not touching her. I cannot imagine how hard that was. I have lost people too. My father, when I was 17, thrown from a horse and broke his neck. My younger sister to fever when she was just 8 years old. Death is part of life out here, part of the risk we all take just by living. But Clara, refusing to let yourself feel anything, refusing to let anyone close, that is not living either. That is just existing. Hearing her first name from his lips sent a shiver through her. What if I cannot do it? What if I try and I still cannot let go of the fear? Then I will be patient. I will be here for as long as it takes. Just give me a chance. That is all I am asking. Jake's voice was rough with emotion. One dinner. One conversation where we are not standing in your store with customers about to walk in. Let me show you that not everything ends in heartbreak. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the hope and uncertainty in his face. She thought about the last 6 months, the careful monotony she had built, the safety of her solitary existence. Then she thought about the flutter in her stomach every time Jake walked through her door, the way his stories had become the brightest parts of her week, the realization that he had somehow slipped past her defenses without her even noticing. "All right," she whispered. "One dinner. This Sunday, if you are available." The smile that broke across Jake's face was like sunrise over the desert. "I am available. I will pick you up at 6. 6 is fine." Clara felt dizzy, as though she had just jumped off a cliff with no idea what lay below. Sunday arrived wrapped in golden light, and a nervousness that made Clara change her dress 3 times, before settling on a simple blue cotton with white trim at the collar and cuffs. It was one of the few dresses she owned that Thomas had never seen her wear, bought months after his death when she needed something for herself. Something untouched by memory. Jake arrived precisely at 6, wearing clean clothes and with his hair freshly cut. He had shaved too, and Clara was struck by how handsome he was, all strong jaw and those remarkable eyes. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. The restaurant was small but respectable, run by a widow named Mrs. Henderson, who served good home cooking and did not tolerate drunkenness or rowdy behavior. Several people looked up when Clara and Jake entered together, and she saw the speculation begin immediately. By tomorrow, the whole town would know that the widow Peterson had stepped out with the cowboy from the Double I Ranch. "Does it bother you?" Jake asked, pulling out her chair. "The attention?" "Yes and no. I knew it would happen. Carlin is small enough that everyone knows everyone's business." Clara spread her napkin across her lap. "But I am tired of living according to what people expect. I am tired of being the tragic widow who must observe every unspoken rule of grief." They ordered chicken and potatoes, and as they waited for the food, Jake leaned forward. "Tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with this town or the store or what people expect. Tell me something real." Clara considered this. "I wanted to be a teacher once. Before I married Thomas, I went to a small college back in Ohio. I loved learning, loved books and literature and history. But then I met Thomas at a church social when he was visiting family, and he asked me to come west with him as his wife, and I thought that sounded like an adventure. We had 2 good years before he got sick, and I do not regret my choice." But sometimes I wonder what my life would have looked like if I had finished my degree. What would you teach if you could? Jake's attention was completely focused on her, as though nothing else in the world mattered. English literature. Poetry especially. I love how words can capture something so perfectly that you feel it in your bones. Clara smiled slightly. That probably sounds foolish. It sounds wonderful. Jake reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against her skin. Nothing you say sounds foolish to me. The food arrived, and they ate while talking about everything and nothing. Jake told her about growing up on his family's small ranch in Colorado, how he had learned to ride before he could properly walk. He spoke about the places he had worked, moving from ranch to ranch following the seasons and the pay. He had never stayed anywhere longer than 2 years, always restless, always searching for something he could not quite name. "But then I came here," Jake said quietly, "and I found you. And for the first time in my life, I am thinking about staying put, about building something permanent instead of always drifting." Clara's heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Jake, you cannot make that kind of decision based on me. What if this does not work? What if I disappoint you? Then at least we tried. At least we took the chance." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know you are scared. I know you think protecting your heart is the safest option. But Clara, from where I am standing, you are worth the risk. You are worth staying for." They walked back to her house slowly under a sky full of stars, the desert air finally cooling after the heat of the day. Clara's small house was at the edge of town, a simple 2-room structure with a vegetable garden that she had been tending through the summer. She stopped at the gate, suddenly nervous about what came next. "Thank you for dinner," she said formally. "I enjoyed it. So did I." Jake made no move to leave. "Can I see you again? Maybe next Sunday we could take a ride out to the spring north of town. It is a pretty spot and the weather should be fine." "I would like that." Clara surprised herself with how much she meant it. Jake reached up and very gently brushed a strand of hair back from her face. "I meant what I said. I will be patient. We go as slow as you need." Then he was gone, walking back toward the boarding house where he rented a room, and Clara was left standing in her garden with her pulse racing, and her carefully constructed walls crumbling just a little bit more. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Jake came to the store during the week, always finding some excuse to visit even if he did not need supplies. On Sundays, they spent time together, sometimes riding out into the countryside, sometimes just sitting on her porch and talking while the sun set. Clara found herself telling him things she had never told anyone, secrets and dreams and fears that she had kept locked away. "I was angry at Thomas for dying," she admitted one evening in August. They were sitting on her porch, watching lightning flicker in the distant mountains though no rain fell. "I know that makes me terrible, but I was so angry. Angry that he left me alone, angry that he broke his promises about growing old together, angry that I had to watch it happen and could not do anything to stop it." Jake was quiet for a moment, then said, "That does not make you terrible. That makes you human. Grief is complicated. It is not just sadness. It is anger and guilt and 100 other things all tangled together." "Were you angry when your father died?" Clara asked. "Furious. I was 17 and suddenly I was supposed to be the man of the family, supposed to take care of my mother and sister. I did not want that responsibility. I wanted my father back." Jake stared out at the lightning. "And when my sister died a few years later, I think part of me was angry at her too, for leaving my mother even more broken than she already was. Where is your mother now? She passed 3 years ago." "Heart just gave out," the doctor said, "but I think she died of grief. She never recovered from losing my sister." Jake turned to look at Clara. That is what scares me about you sometimes, that you will let the grief win, that you will just slowly fade away rather than risk living again. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. I am trying, Jake. This with you, it is the hardest thing I have done since Thomas died. Every time I let myself feel something for you, I panic. Because what if something happens to you? What if I lose you too? What if you do not? Jake shifted closer, taking both her hands in his. What if we get 50 good years together? What if we build something real and lasting? Are you going to throw that possibility away because you are afraid of something that might never happen? I do not know if I can be what you need. I do not know if I can give you everything you deserve. Clara was crying now, hot tears sliding down her cheeks. Jake pulled her into his arms, and she let herself collapse against his chest, feeling his heart beating steady and strong beneath her ear. I do not need everything. I just need you to try. I just need you to give us a chance. They sat like that until the lightning moved on and the stars emerged, bright and impossibly distant. Clara felt something shift inside her, some tightly wound spring beginning to loosen. Jake was right. She could not live her whole life afraid. At some point, she had to choose to step forward, to risk the pain for the possibility of joy. I am falling in love with you, she whispered against his shirt, and it terrifies me. She felt him tense, then his arms tightened around her. I fell in love with you the first time you looked at me like I was tracking dirt across your clean floor. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you run that store like a general commanding an army. I love how you always have a book on your counter that you read between customers. I love that you tend your garden every evening like it is a sacred ritual. I love you, Clara Peterson, and I will spend however long it takes proving that you can trust me with your heart. Clara tilted her face up, and Jake kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was her first kiss since Thomas, and for a moment she felt a stab of guilt. But then she let herself sink into the feeling, into the warmth of Jake's lips and the strength of his arms, and she chose to be present in this moment rather than haunted by the past. They continued courting through the rest of summer and into fall. Jake proved true to his word, patient and steady, never pushing Clara further than she was ready to go. He met her grief with understanding, her fears with gentle reassurance, her doubts with unwavering certainty that what they had was worth fighting for. In September, Jake took her to meet his foreman and the other ranch hands at a barn dance, the double I was hosting. Clara wore her best dress, nervous about being introduced as Jake's intended, but the men were kind and respectful. She danced until her feet hurt, spinning in Jake's arms to fiddle music while lanterns swayed overhead, and everyone laughed and celebrated the end of another successful season. I could get used to this, Clara said breathlessly as Jake twirled her in a circle, to being happy, to not being afraid all the time. Good. Jake pulled her close as the music slowed. Because I have been thinking and I want to ask you something. Clara's heart skipped. What is it? Not here. Tomorrow I will come by the store after you close. I want to do this properly. She barely slept that night, her mind racing with possibilities. When Jake arrived the next evening, she had already swept the floor 3 times and rearranged the canned goods twice out of sheer nervousness. He came in and turned the sign on the door to closed, then faced her with an expression that was equal parts hopeful and terrified. Clara, I have been saving money since I was 18 years old. Never had much use for it since I was always moving around, but I kept putting it aside anyway. I have enough now to buy a small piece of land, maybe build a house, start my own little ranch. Nothing fancy, but enough for a good life. He pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold ring with a small garnet stone. This was my grandmother's. My mother gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to a woman worth keeping. Clara, you are worth everything to me. You are worth staying for, worth building a life for. Will you marry me? Will you give me the chance to prove that love does not always end in heartbreak? Clara stared at the ring, her vision blurring with tears. She thought about Thomas, about the love she had lost and the pain she had endured. She thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago, bitter and frightened and determined to never feel anything again. And she thought about the woman she had become over these past months with Jake, slowly learning to open her heart again, to risk the possibility of loss for the certainty of love. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Jake's face transformed with joy, and he slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her with such tenderness that Clara felt her last defenses crumble away. This was not a betrayal of Thomas's memory. This was her choosing to live again, to honor what she had lost by refusing to waste what remained. They were married in October of 1884, exactly 1 year after Thomas had died. Clara wore a new dress, cream-colored silk that Mrs. Henderson helped her sew, and carried wildflowers that Jake had picked that morning. The ceremony was small, just a few friends and the traveling minister who passed through Carlin twice a month. Clara said her vows with a clear voice, meaning every word, and when Jake slid another ring onto her finger, a simple gold band to sit beside his grandmother's garnet, she felt truly married, truly committed to building a new life. Jake had found 20 acres of land, 5 miles outside town, with a small creek running through it and enough grass for a starter herd of cattle. He had already begun building a house, working every spare moment he had, and on their wedding night he carried Clara over the threshold of their new home. It was simple, just 3 rooms and a porch, but Clara thought it was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," Jake said, setting her down gently. Clara looked around at the bare walls and simple furnishings, seeing not what it was but what it would become. "Our home. That sounds perfect." Their first winter together was hard in the way all first years of marriage are hard, learning to navigate each other's habits and moods, figuring out how to merge 2 lives into one. Jake worked long hours building up the ranch while Clara continued to run the store, riding into town every morning before dawn. But every evening they came together, sharing meals and stories and slowly building something solid. In January, Clara realized she had not thought about Thomas in nearly a week. The realization brought a pang of guilt, but also a sense of peace. She would always carry those memories, always honor what they had shared, but she was no longer defined by his death. She was defined by her life with Jake, by the future they were creating together. Spring brought new calves and longer days. Clara taught Jake to read better, spending evenings working through books by lamplight, and he taught her the intricacies of ranching, how to spot a sick cow before symptoms showed, how to mend tack and predict weather by the sky. They were building a partnership, each contributing their strengths, covering each other's weaknesses. One warm May evening, Clara stood on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Jake came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against his solid warmth. "I have something to tell you," she said quietly. "What is it?" "I am with child. The baby should come in October, near our anniversary." Jake spun her around, his face alight with wonder. "Truly, we are going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." Clara smiled, feeling joy bubble up inside her. For a moment, fear whispered in the back of her mind, reminding her of all the things that could go wrong, all the ways she could lose this happiness. But she pushed it away. She had learned that fear would always be there, but it did not have to control her. She could acknowledge it and choose courage anyway. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Jake fussed over her constantly. barely letting her lift anything heavier than a dishcloth, until Clara had to threaten to hit him with the broom if he did not stop treating her like she was made of glass. She continued working at the store until late August, when climbing the steps became too difficult, then hired a young man from town to manage things while she prepared for the baby's arrival. In October of 1885, on a crisp autumn morning when the cottonwoods along the creek had turned to gold, Clara gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, attended by Mrs. Henderson and the doctor from 2 towns over, but when they finally placed the squalling infant in her arms, Clara felt something settle deep in her soul. "He is perfect," Jake whispered, touching one tiny fist with a finger that looked impossibly large in comparison. "What should we name him?" Clara looked at her husband, at the man who had been patient enough to wait for her to heal, brave enough to love her despite her fears, strong enough to build a life they could share. James Thornton, after no one but himself. This is our son, our fresh start." Jake kissed her forehead, then his son's. "James Thornton, I like that. Our boy is going to grow up strong and smart, just like his mother." The years that followed were not without hardship. There were droughts that threatened their cattle and hard winters that tested their endurance. There were moments when Clara's old fears surfaced, when Jake was late coming home and she imagined every possible disaster. But each time he walked through the door safe and whole, the fear loosened its grip just a little more. James grew into a bright, curious toddler with his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. In 1887, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, a quieter baby who nonetheless made her presence known with a surprisingly loud cry when displeased. The house that had seemed so empty now rang with laughter and tears, with the constant noise of a growing family. Clara eventually sold the store to the young man she had hired, realizing that her place was here on the ranch with her family. She did not regret the decision. The store had served its purpose, giving her something to hold onto when she was drowning in grief, but now she had something better to hold. On their 5th anniversary, Jake surprised her with a bookshelf he had built, tall and sturdy with space for all the books she had collected over the years. "For the teacher who never got to teach," he said, watching as Clara traced the smooth wood with her fingers. "Maybe you could start a small school out here for the children in the area. There are enough ranch families around that could use someone to teach their kids." Clara stared at him, the idea taking root immediately. "Do you really think I could?" "I know you could. You have been teaching me and the children. Why not share that with others?" Jake pulled her close. "You gave me a chance when you were terrified. Let me return the favor. Give yourself a chance to do something you love." She started small, just 3 children from neighboring ranches meeting in their front room twice a week. But word spread, and by the following year, Clara had 8 students of varying ages. Jake built a 1-room schoolhouse on their property, and Clara taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and literature to children who might otherwise have grown up without formal education. It was not the career she had once imagined, but it was better because it was hers, built on her own terms in the life she had chosen. James started attending his mother's school when he turned 5, proud to sit among the older children. Sarah followed 3 years later, shy but determined to keep up with her brother. Clara watched them learn and grow, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends, by a community she had helped build, and she thought about how close she had come to missing all of this. How close she had come to letting fear win. One evening in 1892, 8 years after Jake had first walked into her store, Clara stood on the porch of their home watching her husband teach their son how to throw a rope. Sarah was helping her gather eggs from the henhouse, chattering about something one of the older students had said that day. The sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and purple, and the air smelled of sage and approaching autumn. Jake looked up and caught her watching, and the smile he gave her was full of love and contentment. He said something to James, then walked over, pulling Clara into his arms. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I am thinking about how you saved my life." Clara looked up at him, this man who had been patient when she needed patience, who had loved her when she was afraid to love back. "I was dying, Jake. Maybe not physically, but inside where it counts. You brought me back. We saved each other." Jake kissed her, a gentle press of lips that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "You taught me what home means, what it is worth staying for. You gave me a family and a purpose and a reason to be better than I ever thought I could be." "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked. "Tying yourself to a widow who was too scared to take a chance? Never, not for a single moment." Jake's voice was firm. "You were worth the wait, Clara. You are worth everything." Sarah came running up with her basket of eggs, interrupting the moment, and James followed, demanding attention for the rope trick he had finally mastered. Clara and Jake separated to tend to their children, but their hands found each other again as they walked inside. A constant connection, a promise kept. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Clara lay in bed next to her husband and thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about Thomas, about the young woman she had been and the love she had lost. She thought about the widow who had locked herself away, certain that safety lay in never risking her heart again. And she thought about Jake, walking into her store with dusty boots and patient eyes, offering her a chance at something she had been sure she could never have again. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Jake's voice was sleepy but attentive. "For not giving up on me, for being patient, for showing me that I could love again without betraying what I had before." Jake rolled to face her, his hand finding hers beneath the quilt they shared. "You did the hard part, Clara. You were the one who had to find the courage to try. I just waited and hoped you would decide I was worth the risk. You were worth it. You are worth it. This life we have built, our children, our home, all of it is worth it." Clara squeezed his hand. "I was so afraid, but you were right. Some things are worth being afraid for." They fell asleep like that, hands clasped between them, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something lasting from the ashes of grief and the seeds of hope. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the changing seasons. There were good years when the cattle thrived and the school flourished. There were hard years when drought tested their endurance and illness swept through the community. Through all of it, Clara and Jake remained constant, their love deepening with time rather than fading. James grew tall and strong, taking after his father in temperament and build. He learned ranching from Jake and books from Clara, becoming a young man who could work with his hands and think with his mind. Sarah inherited her mother's love of learning and her father's quiet determination, eventually helping Clara teach the younger students when she got old enough. In 1895, when Clara was 34 and Jake was 38, they welcomed another son into the world. They named him Thomas, not to replace the husband she had lost, but to honor the fact that he had been part of her story, part of the path that led her to this moment. Jake held the infant with the same wonder he had shown with their first two children, and Clara loved him even more for understanding why this name mattered. The ranch continued to grow, slowly but steadily. Jake proved to have a natural talent for breeding cattle, developing a reputation for quality stock that spread throughout Nevada and into California. They were never wealthy, but they were comfortable, able to provide for their children and help their neighbors when times got hard. Clara's school became an institution in the area, with parents sending their children from as far as 10 miles away. She taught more than just academic subjects. She taught the children poetry and music, how to think critically and express themselves clearly. Several of her students went on to attend universities back east, writing her letters about their experiences, and Clara felt proud knowing she had helped open those doors. On their 10th anniversary, Jake took Clara back to the same restaurant where they had shared their first meal together. Mrs. Henderson was still running the place, gray-haired now but as sharp as ever. She gave Clara a knowing smile as she served them chicken and potatoes, the same meal they had eaten a decade before. "You remember what I told you that night?" Jake asked, reaching across the table for her hand. "That you were worth the risk, worth staying for." "I remember." Clara smiled, her wedding rings catching the lamplight. "I remember thinking you were crazy, that I could never be what you needed. You were exactly what I needed. You still are." Jake rubbed his thumb across her knuckles, a gesture that had become familiar over the years. "Clara, these have been the best 10 years of my life. Watching our family grow, building the ranch together, seeing you come alive again after the grief had nearly extinguished you. I would wait another 100 years if that is what it took." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears, the kind that came from a heart too full to contain all its joy. "You do not have to wait anymore. I am not afraid, Jake, not of loving you, not of losing you, not of any of it. Whatever time we have, whether it is 10 more years or 50, I want to spend every moment of it with you." They walked home slowly under the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their first promises, their first tentative steps toward love. The town had grown since then, new buildings rising along Main Street, more families settling in the area. But some things remained constant. The mountains still stood sentinel to the west. The desert still bloomed in spring. And Clara and Jake still held hands like newlyweds, still found joy in each other's presence, still chose each other every single day. When they reached their house, now expanded to 6 rooms to accommodate their growing family, they found James watching the younger children while they slept. At 16, he was nearly a man, already talking about his future on the ranch. He looked up when they entered and smiled. "How was dinner?" he asked. "Perfect," Clara said, kissing the top of his head. "Thank you for watching your brother and sister." "No problem, Ma. I like it when it is quiet. Gives me time to read that book you lent me." James held up a worn copy of poetry that Clara had owned since her college days. She looked at Jake and saw the same pride reflected in his eyes that she felt. Their son was growing into someone who valued both hard work and literature, who could gentle a frightened horse and quote Shakespeare. They had done this, she and Jake together, built a family and a home where children could grow strong and thoughtful. After James headed to his own room, Clara stood in the doorway of the bedroom she shared with Jake and looked around. It was not fancy, just simple furniture and a quilt she had sewn herself, but it represented everything she had thought she would never have again. Peace, joy, love. Jake came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist the way he had done countless times before. "What are you thinking about?" "I am thinking about how I almost said no that first time you asked me to dinner, how I almost let fear rob me of all of this." Clara leaned back against him. "I am thinking about how grateful I am that you were patient enough to wait, stubborn enough to keep trying even when I pushed you away." "I could see past the fear to the woman underneath," Jake said quietly. "I could see your strength and your capacity for love, even when you had buried it under all that grief. I knew you were worth fighting for." Clara turned in his arms, looking up at the face that had become more dear to her than any other. There were lines around his eyes now from long days in the sun, threads of gray in his dark hair, scars from a lifetime of hard work. But to her, he was perfect. He was home. "I love you," she said simply. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You healed something in me that I thought was broken forever. You healed yourself, Clara. You found the courage to try again. I just gave you a reason." Jake cupped her face in his hands. "And I love you too more every day. That is the thing about real love. It does not fade. It just keeps growing." They stood like that for a long moment. Two people who had found each other when one was drifting and the other was drowning, who had built a life from patience and courage and stubborn hope. Outside, the Nevada night was vast and star-filled. Inside, their children slept safely, and between them there was love enough to last a lifetime. The years continued their relentless march forward. Clara and Jake grew older. Their children grew up and started families of their own. James took over more of the ranch operations while keeping a small herd of his own. Sarah surprised everyone by leaving to attend a college back east, then returning with a teaching degree to take over her mother's school. Thomas, their youngest, showed an aptitude for business that led him to expand the ranch's operations beyond anything his parents had imagined. Through it all, Clara and Jake remained each other's constant. They celebrated grandchildren and mourned neighbors who passed. They survived droughts and economic panics, and all the small trials that come with a life fully lived. And every year on their anniversary, they returned to that same restaurant if Mrs. Henderson's daughter, who had taken over the place, was still running it, ordering chicken and potatoes and remembering the night when everything had changed. On their 25th anniversary in 1909, Jake surprised Clara with a trip back to Ohio to visit the college where she had once studied. They took the train east, a journey that would have taken months in a wagon but now took only days thanks to the railroad. Clara walked the campus where she had once dreamed of becoming a teacher, and she smiled realizing that she had become one anyway, just not in the way she had expected. "No regrets?" Jake asked as they stood outside the building where she had attended literature classes decades before. "None," Clara said firmly. "My life turned out better than anything I could have planned. I got to teach, to build a home, to raise children and watch them grow. And I got you, which is worth more than any career or credential." They returned to Nevada in time for the harvest, and Clara realized that she was truly happy, the deep bone-level contentment that came from a life well lived. She was 58 years old now, her hair more silver than brown, her hands marked by years of work. But she felt more alive than she had at 22 when grief had threatened to consume her. The children threw them a party at the ranch, inviting everyone they had known over the years. The house and yard filled with people, 3 generations laughing and sharing stories. Clara stood on the porch watching it all, feeling Jake's hand slip into hers. "We did good," he said quietly. "We did very good." Clara squeezed his hand. "Thank you for giving me this. For being patient enough to wait while I found my courage. Thank you for taking the chance." Jake pulled her close, and they danced slowly to the music drifting from the house. Two people who had learned that love did not always end in heartbreak, that sometimes it lasted forever if you were brave enough to reach for it. The party continued until late, but eventually the guests departed and their children herded their own families home. Clara and Jake were left alone in the quiet house, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life. Photographs on the walls, books on shelves, a worn quilt draped over the sofa. All the small pieces that added up to home. They sat on the porch as they had done so many times before, watching the stars emerge one by one. Clara leaned against Jake's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid warmth of his presence. "I would do it all again," she said softly. "Every moment, even the hard ones. It all led me here to this life with you. So would I." Jake kissed the top of her head. You are worth waiting for, Clara Thornton. You are still worth waiting for every single day. They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who had learned that patience and courage could overcome even the deepest fears, that love could heal wounds that seemed fatal, that saying yes to possibility was always worth the risk. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human joy and sorrow. But here on this porch in Nevada, in a house built by faith and hard work, love was not indifferent. Love was patient and kind and brave. Love was Jake offering his hand and Clara finding the courage to take it. Love was 25 years of choosing each other, of building a life one day at a time. Love was worth every risk, every fear, every moment of doubt. And as Clara sat wrapped in her husband's arms under the vast western sky, she knew with absolute certainty that choosing to love again had been the bravest and best decision of her life.